Today's presenter will be Regina Fullen. She is the Director of GXP Compliance. A couple housekeeping things before I make her introduction. Just want to welcome everyone here and let you know that we'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation. We're going to stay as long as you like for questions. If at some time during the presentation you do have a question you want to ask, just there's a little questions box in the GoToWebinar box you have on your screen. Type that question in, send it on over, and we're just going to go in the order they were received at the end of the presentation. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Regina Fullen is Director of GXP Compliance Consulting with Compliance Team, where she assists clients in the medical device and pharmaceutical industries to help them achieve their compliance goals, help them with regulations in the pharma, medical, and related industries. Within her role at CTI, Regina also uses her writing skills, and she's excellent at taking pen to paper, or fingers to keys, if you will. And she writes several great articles that we share throughout, meaningful articles to help medical manufacturers stay current with regulatory changes, industry trends, and improve product quality. She is also a certified quality engineer, certified quality auditor, certified manager of quality organizational excellence with ASQ. So she wears many hats, and I'm sure she is glad to be here today to share her expertise and answer your questions. And so without any further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Regina.
Thank you, Val, for that wonderful introduction. And we kind of want to start off with some session objectives. I hope everybody that this is in line with what you thought you were going to learn. The first thing we're going to do is provide an overview of the most current publicly available data on the FDA 483 observations. We just finished the end of the 2018 fiscal year, so we don't have anything for 2018. We will be taking this up to 2017. We'll provide a comparative analysis of the FDA 483 observations against some historical data. So you'll get to see how it's doing from the past. We'll understand how that 483 observation rate provides some kind of a window into the way that the FDA is approaching its enforcement objectives. And then we're going to identify some high priority compliance actions that you can take home back to the company so you can avert 483 observations at your next FDA inspection. So let's get right into it. If you're a pharmaceutical company, here's the top 10. We'll do like a David Letterman top 10 kind of thing. Number 10, quality control unit is absent or lacks the authority or responsible for approving, rejecting components, drug products, or records. So that's 46 observations at number 10. Number 9, 47 observations. Laboratory control mechanisms specifications are not followed or documented at the time of performance. So that's a data integrity issue. So that's at number 9. Number 8, calibration programs. Kind of important. If you're going to be measuring something, you need to have it calibrated. And same thing here, equipment cleanliness. If you're going to be using equipment, you have to make sure that it's clean enough and doing its job properly. Number 6 with 54 citations in 2017, procedures for complaints. Complaints, of course, something that's very important on the medical device side, and pharmacovigilance, still very important on the pharma side. And then tied for 5th and 4th place at 69 citations each, we have a training issue. And we have lab controls. Again, another data integrity issue. If you look at number 9 and then the one at the bottom, you're seeing data integrity being somewhat cited here, the lab controls. So where are we so far with numbers 4 through 10? We got 384 of the 1,923.43 observations that were cited in 2017. So now we get to 3, 2, and 1. So 3, we don't have production and process control procedures, or they're not good enough. Then 2 is that you're not doing a good review of your discrepancies or batch component failures, failure investigation in short, at 110 observations. And number 1, another quality unit citation, that the quality unit responsibilities are not in writing or fully followed, which kind of echoes number 10 on the list. In all, so the top 3 make 16% of the observations. The top 10 make 36% of the observations, which is sizable. It's about more than a third for the top 10. But I would say that it's not quite the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the problems is found in 20% of the citations. So, why is that? Well, at least for pharma, there's a lot of sections there. So, 80-20 rule, when you have to look at every single section, there's 60 sections, and then a lot of times they do the citation by subclause A, subclause B, subclause C. You have a lot of clauses to cite. And I think that maybe the FDA has their favorites, but they're trained to kind of come around and make sure that you get a full audit every so often. So if the last time they came and audited you and focused on production and process controls, the next time they come, they're going to focus on something different, like maybe laboratory controls. So they're going to be kind of running the gamut of making sure that the full regulation is audited too. So you're not going to see as much similarity from one company to the next. And the other thing that causes a lack of similarity from one company to the next is that there's a lot of variation in the types of pharmaceutical manufacturers that affect compliance, such as risk. So what you have is there's a risk level of the pharmaceutical product itself, which can range from sterile injectables at the very most risky end to a topical over-the-counter product at the least. And the product could be used at the very ill or the very well, or even the terminally ill. Or terminally ill, you might have lower risk if it's a palliative product that makes them feel better because they're going to die anyway. That could be considered low risk, ironically, versus something that could really harm somebody who is very ill, who needs that medication in order to survive. Is that pharmaceutical product a finished good or an active pharmaceutical ingredient? In other words, is it going to be sold like that, as is, in its packaging, with labeling? There's labeling issues that you would see with a finished pharmaceutical product that you will not see with an active pharmaceutical ingredient that will be further processed at some other facility somewhere further down the supply chain. And is that, now this is another thing that affects risk. It affects risk in the eyes of the FDA, maybe not risks in the eyes of the product. But is this an established entity that the FDA is going to come and inspect, or is it a startup? Do they think that these people are still learning how to become GMP compliant? Or Or is this system supposed to be like world class? And the FDA does have higher expectations for a company that should have been in existence for many, many years and kind of have a knowledge of what they're supposed to be doing. And then the other thing that kind of comes into play here is it a foreign establishment or a domestic establishment? Now, that doesn't seem like it really affects the risk level, but it does in a way, because the FDA is trying to manage lots of foreign entities with a very limited budget. So typically, an inspection at a foreign establishment will not be as long, or if they find something wrong, unlike what they would do at a US facility, pardon me, they're not going to camp out there for a month to find every single quality issue at that foreign establishment. Instead, they will do a one-day inspection. They will give their findings. They will close out the investigation and then basically say, we'll put an import alert on it. Remember, a foreign establishment is not violating the law by being out of compliance. They are simply not allowed to sell it into the US. So now let's get into devices. Got off my soapbox for pharmaceuticals, now we're in devices. Number 10 for devices, CAPA. Yeah, if a company doesn't have a good CAPA system, you're going to have good activities and results that need to be documented well. That's it. And then number 9, medical device reporting procedures. Notice that this is against 803, not 820, the quality system regulation, but against the medical device reporting regulation, which applies to devices uniquely, but is also part of what gets inspected. For devices, then the device history record. Procedures were inadequately established, maintained to demonstrate the device was manufactured per 820. Device history records are basically the equivalent of a batch record, and they need to be documented just as well as you would see a batch record in pharmaceutical. And this is data integrity finding. Next one, process validation. So we didn't see process validation in pharmaceuticals, and I think it's because pharmaceutical products probably do a pretty good job with validation. In devices, and this is a very interesting thing here, in devices, they just say you have to validate a process that cannot be fully verified by subsequent inspection and test, meaning that if it's destructive testing, where by inspecting it you would destroy all of the product, then you must validate. And then we go to design validation. So you got process validation, now design validation. Design validation having to do with validating that the design, when you do design controls, is validated. Different thing than process validation. And possibly it's 7 and 6 there because people confuse process validation and design validation. Then the next one, this is about incoming material, purchasing controls, number 5. And number 4, quality audits. So device manufacturers are required to perform quality audits in which the auditor is not to audit their own work. And there may be some issues with that at some device manufacturers. So where are we right now? So we're at 667 of the 2,573. So for 4 through 10, we actually are getting at 26%. So we're getting a higher proportion of findings in devices caught in with our top 10, and we haven't even counted 3, 2, and 1. 3, procedure specifications. This is about the device master record in many ways. So you have to ensure that there's good production and process control. This is a production and process control thing. Generally, you have that in a device master record. Now we have complaints again. We see complaints again on the 820 side, where we saw it in the 803 side. Before, it was about medical device reporting procedures. Well, what feeds into medical device reporting procedures are complaint procedures. So they'll probably look at the complaint procedures first, determine if there was a MDR assessment for those complaints, and if not, then the medical device establishment would get both findings. And number 1, kappa again. We we saw kappa at number 10, and now we see kappa again at number 1. So we can see that there's duplicates for complaints and kappa. So the FDA probably feels pretty strongly about kappa and complaints, and they feed into one another. So that makes sense. So where are we with the total? The top 3 make up 24% of the observations. The top 10 make up 50% of the observations. So if you're doing a risk-based medical device self-audit, I would focus on these top 10. So now it's time for a poll. Wake you guys up. If you were inspected next week, how well do you feel your organization would perform against the top 10? I am launching the poll. Go ahead and vote with your voting box, and I'll give you guys a minute to complete it. Okay, I think I'm going to stop the poll because it looks like everybody's done voting, and I will read you the results. So 29% of you feel either very confident or confident. So that's really good, nearly 30% in both categories. But we have a 37% of you feel kind of so-so, not sure that you're kind of weak. And you have another 6% of you who are concerned about what your audit performance would be if that happened. That's okay. Now you know what the top 10 are. At least you can do a risk-based assessment of how you perform. So now we're going to kind of get into the FDA focus. So do we think that the FDA truly has changed their focus recently? Well, if you are working in working to manage a quality management system, how do you determine if there's any changes within your organization? Well, you do a trend chart. You look for changes. You look for, for instance, here, you see this one thing jumping above the upper control limit. You know that there's a change. You see that there was some downward slope before it jumped. So you can understand that. So we can do the same type of thing to look at FDA 483 data. Why not? But I kind of had to, instead, we're not going to do a control chart. Control charts are not a good tool for this particular thing. So I did a different kind of trend chart. First of all, because I don't have 30 years worth of FDA data, and you would definitely see a different focus there. Instead, I did a trend chart that kind of looks like this, where I took the past several years of data, And I put the different regulations. Each regulation has its own little special color. And we could see if it's in the top 10, it'll be somewhere mapped in this area. If it falls off the top 10, it's going to go to rank equals 0. So you can see very clearly when something was in there, was in the top 10, was not in the top 10, was in the top 10, and then, like, for instance, this one left the top 10 again. So let's look at some of the things that are in this, some patterns I noticed in here. First of all, we have 211.22D. That was number 1 last year. It has been the number 1 483 finding for pharmaceuticals for the past 4 years. So FDA has not changed their focus in that one iota. On the opposite end, we have 211.165A, which had been number 7 for 3 years running and then suddenly left in 2017. And then we see this mess. What does this mess mean? Kind of looks like a Mickey Mouse when I put the 2 ovals there. What that means is we had a lot of things that weren't on the top 10 in 2016 that got onto the top 10 in 2017. And a lot of things that were in the top 10 before that and left the top 10 in 2017. And then you get this big cluster of mess here where it's all tangled up, where you can see that there was definitely some kind of change going on. So we do believe, based on this data, that there was some change in focus between 2016 and 2017 in the FDA 483 observations. So what were they? So we got some newcomers in the top 10 in 2017. Training got in there, and complaint procedures got in there. They were not previously there, but it's interesting to me that complaint procedures came to the top 10 43s for pharma. And it kind of shows that pharma is now starting to align a little bit with devices, where devices had 2 different 483 findings for complaints, one for MDRs, one for complaint handling. Now they decided, complaints are important. Now, what left? Release testing left. Procedures to ensure sterility left. Now, you would think, oh, do they think that release testing and procedures aren't important anymore? No. I think that what they're doing is looking a little bit deeper into the issues. So, for instance, release testing came back on the playing field, or left, because now they're looking at complaint procedures and saying, how come your release testing didn't catch these things that later became complaints? Furthermore, procedures to ensure sterility. Of course you have procedures that ensure sterility, but if people aren't trained to them or aren't doing what the procedures tell them to do, then your procedures really aren't the problem. The problem is your training. So they're looking a little bit deeper into the issues. But we've already said 211.22D, which is about your quality control unit, that's been a number 1 for the past 4 years. The FDA expects the quality control unit to be running the show and to be making sure that training is done, that complaints are being managed, as well as procedures to ensure sterility being enforced. So really, the FDA is looking a little deeper and aligning themselves with devices in a way for pharma. So now let's go into devices. In devices, you can see a few interesting things. First of all, number 1 and number 2 have been the same for the past 5 years. That's interesting. We have a number of things that have changed. It looked like, we got a little switcheroo between what was number 3 and number 10 and number 10 and number 3 there. And then we got a few minor changes between 2013, 2014, 2014, 2015. And then we see this still major mess between 2016 and 2017. So what is that? Well, there are some changes in devices as well. The newcomers to the top 10 were design validation and device history records. Okay, interesting. Long-standing top 10 that left, we had design change procedures. Looks like they're looking a little bit deeper into design changes and saying, hey, did you validate that design before you changed it? And device master record maintenance. So again, device history records are device master records feed into device history records, right? You create a batch record and then you complete it for your historical file. So they're looking a little bit deeper. And of course, CAPA and complaints. Consistently 1 and 2 for the past 5 years. The FDA is not changing their focus on CAPA and complaints. Keep up with a good CAPA and complaint program. That's important, but also look at your design history files and your device history records, and make sure that you have a good design validation. So we did see a change. So what was the root cause? Well, we think the first thing is that the FDA changed its organizational structure between 2016 and 2017. They went to a program called program alignment. They used to be arranged in districts. You would be inspected by somebody from your regional district office who would come in and evaluate your compliance. And what would happen sometimes is you might be running a electromechanical medical device. Let's say that's what your facility makes. And you know what? They didn't have anybody available who knew anything about electromechanical devices in your district. So they sent you a dairy inspector. So you spent a lot of time in the inspection educating them about your device and what you do, and there was not as much inspection going on. So the FDA decided they would align people by subject matter expertise, and it doesn't matter where they are, they'll fly them out if they need to. And when they had subject matter expertise, they are actually doing intense training and giving them a subject matter certification to ensure that inspectors are consistent. And there is a reporting structure where you will go to your supervising expert if you have any questions, so that there's always consistency among all the inspectors. There's going to be no differences there. And the other thing that's going on in the FDA is that there's this whole globalization thing happening. There's this increasing number of imports. I'll show you a graph on that later. And we're going to be looking at data integrity and compliance culture abroad. Now they have to start inspecting facilities that are not necessarily based in the US. And we'll take a look at the FDA data dashboard, which gives us a little more globalization understanding. And this is the FDA's data dashboard on compliance actions that are taken against entities in foreign countries according to some kind of a color scale. Now you can see that the most compliance actions are actually in the United States, followed by larger economies. We got Canada and China and Australia, and it looks like Spain, France, Germany. Then you have another, you got a paler green for Mexico and Brazil. And then even still paler, you have, the Russia, and then you get to the orange, where those might be smaller economies, smaller production units overall. But anyway, we do see that compliance overall, still the United States is #1 where there's compliance actions, because you can reach us better. And in general, you can see that the United States, just for devices and drugs, now that was foods, that was everything. Now we're talking devices and drugs. The only place that you see a high amount of compliance actions is in the United States, and then every other places, if it's getting any, it's in the next tier down in the dark green. So we have a new poll, and I would like to get your thoughts on if this worldwide data so far is surprising you. And I'm going to give you a minute to look at it. You can choose more than one answer if you think, if you're, for instance, you're surprised and you by more than one thing, you're allowed to choose more than one answer for this question. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll and read you back the results. So most of you, 43%, well, actually, most of you thought that it looked about the way that you expected it to look. But then there was a very closely behind, so 46% of you thought that, but then 43% of you did expect more international compliance issues. And that's because we keep on hearing all this stuff about, other emerging economies trying to manufacture pharmaceuticals, and we see a lot of interesting warning letters being posted on the internet for some things that you're like, well, how on earth is that even possible? But we also got some answers saying they expect a little more variation across the board. That was 22% of you. And 11% thought that there should be fewer compliance actions in the United States. Again, a similar thing, but it's just interesting to look at this. So I'm going to look at some other, regions and foreign and domestic observations and stuff like that. So this is from the FDA's website showing the number of inspections by region. So you would expect to see more compliance actions domestically than you would anywhere else in the world, because they're inspecting foreign facilities almost 3 times more than they're inspecting foreign establishments. So you're going to get more inspections just because, frankly, we're easier to reach. But the FDA is taking the import situation very seriously, and that they continue to do more and more inspections in foreign entities. So, and you can see here's the rate at which imports are climbing every year. So the top inset one is for all imports. That's everything that's regulated. The lower left is for devices and pharma and devices, and they put pharma and biologics in the same category. And you can see that the trend lines are pretty much the same slope. One thing you need to understand with this is that to interpret this graph is not by dollars, it's by lines. And what is a line? A line would be a shipment, a unique product within a shipment. So let's say you got a pallet and the pallet had 4 different SKUs on it that got shipped to the United States. Then that would be, that particular pallet would contain 4 lines according to the FDA's count. So you understand a little bit more about what that is. So this, you can see imports are increasing. The FDA is trying to increase their rate of inspection at foreign establishments. They're still inspecting domestic establishments more vigorously because it is actually against the law. If you are out of compliance in the United States, if you're out of compliance in a foreign country, they just put you on an import alert and keep you from being able to bring stuff into the country. But here, we're going to look at a little more data. So this is for foreign inspections, the number of audit findings, not audit findings, but the number of outcomes of the audit. So there are 3 outcomes of an audit. There's NAI, which means no action indicated, meaning you're okay, we couldn't find anything, you're not in violation, you're good. VAI, which says, hey, we found a few things wrong with your facility and we expect you to fix them. Well, you're not going to get a warning letter or anything like that. Well, please respond. And then OAI, which means official action indicated, we're putting you on import alert, we're going to take some enforcement actions against your company because we believe that your product is not safe. So you can see that the NAI and OAI are pretty closely matched together for foreign inspections. And then you have this background noise of red OAIs. And we can see that the VAIs are climbing a little bit. So they're going to be doing a little bit more in foreign inspections. The FDA is using a risk-based model, and they can identify which manufacturers are more suspicious. And they kind of go after those first. Now, here's the difference that you see with domestic. You can see that OAI and VAI kind of closely mirror each other, but you can see most of the green is, there's quite a bit of space between it and the voluntary action indicated in a domestic company. But you still see that same background of mess in the red for official action indicated. And you can also see here that the rate of US inspections is decreasing, while we have the rate of foreign inspections increasing. So we're taking a little more resources and moving them internationally. And we think that's because there's a lower risk there. Again, there's not much time to do an inspection in a foreign entity. It's too expensive to camp out there for months. Do a quick inspection, do some risk analysis and determine which inspections are most likely to yield most meaningful results, and work from it that way. So here we can see that the FDA is still challenged to inspect those foreign entities at the same rate of US ones. We have all this growth in the foreign market, but we are seeing, for instance, domestically in 2017, there were 4,114 that would be like the denominator for warning letters, the number of findings. The number of inspections were 4,114 in the US, whereas outside the US, there were only 863 inspections. So we got 3% of US entities are getting warning letters versus 8% of the entities that are in a foreign country that are getting warning letters. And then you can see, this is an interesting thing here. The scale is very different. So I had kind of had to stretch the bar chart so that they were at similar scales. You can kind of see that you're doing a lot more inspection on the US side than you are in the foreign side, but getting higher percentage rates than what you get in the foreign. And the FDA has publicly announced that this globalization problem is a problem. This is a problem. And so you have on the left side, the drug manufacturing side, we're talking about agencies' global effort to assure product quality and transparency at foreign drug manufacturing facilities. And then on the other side, CDRH, Center for Drugs and Radiological Devices, they are also trying to tackle this globalization problem, this national evaluation system for medical devices. They want to be first in the world, and it's not about a competition between countries, but a measure of timely patient access. So they're trying to get things out there to patients quickly, but they also want to do it in a safe way. So what does that mean to you? We see what the trends are for the 483s, and now we see what the trends are in the FDA. How do you put that all together and integrate it into something, you know, that's useful for you to take back to the company? Well, if you're a pharma manufacturer, your quality unit needs to be strong. You can't let your production people run amok. You can't let unsafe work practices that are going to endanger your patients take place. You have to be watching your people like a hawk and enforcing your policies and procedures and having good policies and procedures to go with it. If you're a device manufacturer, again, CAPAs and complaints have been #1 and #2 for the past 5 years. Your CAPA and complaint procedures have to be written and enforced, which probably means that you have to have a good quality unit in your device manufacturing space too. So everything that we're saying here, quality unit, CAPAs, and complaints, because we're talking about investigations and complaints that you see in pharma, we're also in there. These are true for both devices and pharma. Device and pharma are pretty closely aligned. They may be two different regulations, and they might say things in a different way, but they're getting to the same place. It also means that the FDA is getting better and better and better at their job. And they're using risk-based tools, like they're identifying which foreign manufacturer should we go after first, and they're getting a higher hit rate on finding the foreign manufacturers that are out of compliance. And they also are going to use the risk-based tools domestically if you're a domestic manufacturer. So the FDA will find you. And the FDA has learned on the device side that complaints are a window to quality, and employee training is essential to assuring good quality. So they're going to be looking at that. And if you are a device person, they're going to do a much more rigorous job at looking at your design history file, your device master record, and trying to find the discrepancies there. And they're going to look at your design validation, not just your design changes, because you can't just change a design without answering the validation question. And overall, that means that there's going to be a greater emphasis on data integrity. Data integrity is the quality unit's job to enforce, to make sure that people are following good documentation practices. They are documenting things in real time, following procedures so that they're not obliterating data, that they are actually keeping things. If there's errors, you're going to be doing a good failure investigation on your on your QC failures and understanding where the discrepancies are, and that people are trained to do it properly. So what should your action plan be now that you know what these compliance actions are? Well, the first one is you should do a self audit. One of the findings in the top 10 for devices was quality auditing. So this should be just something that you do anyway, especially if you're a device manufacturer. But do a self audit, and you want to dig deep on those complaints and data integrity and quality unit and all those things that are in the top 10. Especially with the things in the top 10 that you really feel, based on our poll, you might be weak on. And if you feel, well, we'll get into that later, but you want to do like a little mock inspection. Do the whole thing. Bring in somebody who's going to be like your inspector, and ask them to focus in on things. I just recently did one where I said, I want you to do a device master record, device history record, design history file, centric audit of our company. Went in there, spent a day with them, really dug into those issues, gave them a nice audit report. It worked out very well. You need to open investigations and CAPAs for your identified issues. So once you've done your audit, now you have the data to say, we have a compliance problem here. Let's do an investigation in CAPA. Let's understand what the root cause is. Let's fix things at the root cause. And that way, what you can do is you are showing the FDA regulators when they come in that you are being proactive about finding your problems and fixing them. And so if they start coming in and saying, I want to take a look at your design history file, and you've done an audit of your design history file, and you found that there were these certain issues, and you put them in an investigation in CAPA, and you're now maybe only halfway finished remediating your CAPA. Maybe it's a big problem. You need to do a lot of work. But you can show them the CAPA that is half completed and said, here, we found a root cause. Here's our root cause. Here's what we've done so far. Here are the things we still need to do. We understand that we have a problem, but we're doing our best to make it better. The FDA is not going to take issue with a company that understands its own problems and is working proactively to fix them before the FDA has to come in and see it themselves. Problem is when you aren't doing that. And so the third thing kind of going with this is that you need to ensure that the documentation is present for your inspection support. So if you opened a CAPA and then nothing was done on it, that looks really bad. If you opened a CAPA and it's like, partially done and it looks like you're making progress on it, that's very good. So if you know that the FDA is going to come in and inspect, FDA generally will not give you a surprise inspection unless they think it's for cause, that they think that there's a problem with your company. They'll give you maybe a couple weeks advance notice. If they do that, use that time to get your files in order. Okay, I know that they're going to ask about these top 10 items. Why don't I get those things in order so that when they ask for it, all I have to do is pull it off the shelf and give it to, here, Mr. or Mrs. Inspector, here's what I have prepared for you. It builds a lot of trust. And that, to me, is the most important part of an inspection. If you get the inspector's trust, you're building a relationship there. Your company is building a positive relationship there. You're not going to get as many difficult questions if you show that your life is an open book. And so if you need to get audit ready, you need somebody to do an audit to make sure that you have all your things in order. You want somebody to help you with the mock inspection CTI has resources that can help get your organizational audit ready. They can help you do that self-audit that you need to do. Let's say you have resources that can't be taken away from your current roles to audit. We can provide that. And that's my only ad plug for this thing, because the correct thing to do never requires any subterfuge. It's simple and direct. And that's what we want your how your inspection should run, is just very, here it is. And yes, there are going to be things that you would rather the inspector not see. That's always going to happen. But it's how you handle it that makes the difference. So now we're going to our last poll question. I've kind of gone over what your action plan will be. So go ahead and vote. Do you know what your organization needs to do based on the top 10 data and FDA trending? I'll give you a minute to fill that out. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. So 46% of you said yes, and I want to show this action plan to my management. I think that that's, good. You have an idea where you're going. And then you say 21% of you said yes, but my action plan is different from the one you've shown before. You know what? If it fits your organization, go ahead and use your own action plan as long as it covers what you need to cover. And then 32% of you said somewhat. I have a feeling where we need to go, what we need to do. We're still kind of exploring. And that's fine too. We can help you out if that's necessary. But it's just, so that's fine. But it looks like none of you said that you don't have an idea of what you need to do. And that's really good, because that's where we want to be. We want to understand what we're doing. So we're going to summarize. So the top 10 43s do provide a view in the FDA's current thinking on the relative importance of regulations. The top 10 43 also shows how well industry is complying, because if people are complying, they wouldn't be on the top 10. We saw a shift in the top 10 43s in 2017. I'm curious to find out what we're going to see for 2018. I still need to compile that data because it's not publicly available yet. Once it is, I may be doing another analysis there. And to understand the shift, you have to look inside the FDA to identify the cause. Just like if you saw a shift in your own internal trending, you're going to have to do some kind of root cause investigation. That's kind of what I did here. And we see that the causes are increased imports, a focus on data integrity, and that means that the FDA had to adjust their organizational structure so they can do more inspections worldwide and to focus on those things. And so if you understand these things, the top 10, we're going to kind of apply the Pareto principle here. We can't fully apply it because there's a lot of regulations that the FDA looks at that you may know that the FDA is going to look at when they come and re-inspect you. Maybe if they had a specific 483 finding your last inspection, they're going to see how well you're doing on it. but you can place priority on the regulations you know that the FDA is probably going to look at and spend a lot of their time on in your organization. And that concludes the presentation. I'd like to open it up to questions now. Let me see if there's...
Thank you, Regina. We do have one question here. And if you joined after I kind of gave the kind of the notes of the session here, there is a questions box in your control panel. Just go ahead and type that question in, and we are going to get you answers. I did have a couple people ask, are we going to send out a copy of this presentation? And the answer is yes. We will be sending out a link to the PDFs of these slides that'll be on our website, and you'll also get a copy of the recorded webinar. So we will have this information for you to share with your colleagues that we'll be sending out within the next few days. And hopefully everything here has been very helpful for you. We appreciate you attending today, and let's get started on a couple more questions here. For data integrity, what has been the focus, electronic versus paper? Regina?
Well, it's been a little bit 50-50 each. So some of the really egregious looking warning letters that you see were like, we saw a dumpster full of documents that needed to be shredded, and we found some of those and we compared them to your internal laboratory records and saw that they didn't match. Or laboratory notebooks not matching the final results. But we also see a lot of issues, especially domestically and with computerized systems, specifically in the lab. They're looking more at lab data, it seems to me, on whether or not you are using the data integrity controls on your automated instruments and on your LIMS system. So, for instance, there are ways for you to be able to operate an HPLC with a generic login and maybe go in there and overwrite results. And of course, the FDA wants companies to disable those capabilities and give each user their own unique login, and that results are there and that there's going to be a data trail, just like you would see in any Part 11 qualified instrument. So that all data is attributable to the person who generated it. But I don't see that there's much of a distinction in the FDA's eyes between what constitutes data integrity for paper records versus electronic records. The expectation is the same. It's just that it's different because one is electronic and the other one is paper.
Okay. We have another question here. Do the pharma trends include biotechs as well? This is a great question.
You know what? That's an interesting one, because what the pharma ones are is just 210 to 11. I do understand that biological products have a different, pardon me, I'm getting over a cold. Biotechs have a different regulation, but it doesn't specifically include that. The only place where I actually include biotech together was where the FDA kind of grouped it together for import data. But I want to add another caveat there for biotech and pharma, because some biotech products are actually devices as well. So there's kind of a blurry line there between that. And one year when I published the top 10 43s, I got a request from someone, could you compile the data for last year for biotech products? And I did, and there was a great deal of correspondence. So even though I didn't actually compile the data for biotech products, I believe that there is a great deal of correspondence in this data between biotech and pharma. So I would use it as if that's what they're going to be looking at, because the FDA is pretty well aligned. You can even see that there's new alignment happening between pharma and devices, and the same thing's going to apply to biotech products.
Okay. Next question. What is the percentage of 483s for contract manufacturers for TPMs for both pharma and medical devices?
Well, I don't think that the FDA, or at least the data I haven't looked at, separated out whether it was a third-party manufacturer or contract manufacturer versus a registered entity. If it was a drug establishment, it's a drug establishment, whether it's a third-party manufacturer or not. And if you're not registered with the FDA, of course, let's say you're a third-party manufacturer that manufactures something that's not an API or excipient or something like that, I don't know, or something that could be reclassified for use, you won't be registered with the FDA at all. So that's very difficult to find. But in general, this applies across the board. It's not for third parties. Now, the additional requirement, though, that third-party manufacturers have that that regular registered device establishments or device or pharma establishments don't, is that they are also subject to their customers coming in and auditing them and verifying that they are that they're good. But the FDA doesn't change the requirements for one thing or the other. If you're getting inspected by the FDA, the requirements will be the same. You might have different requirements, though, for your customers.
Okay. More great questions. Is the FDA encouraging industries to move towards 21 CFR Part 11 compliance equipment instruments rather than just mechanical equipment instruments at manufacturing site for filling packaging on lines?
Yes, I would say it definitely is, but they aren't calling it that. So a few years back, the FDA determined that they were no longer going to be enforcing Part 11. And that was very curious to those of us, and it caused us to make some conjectures of why aren't they not going to be following this this anymore. And I was making some assumptions that maybe it could have to do with they wanted to that Part 11 didn't talk about whether your machines could be hacked, and maybe they're worried more about well, then after that, then they came with the data integrity guidance. And the data integrity guidance was basically saying, okay, we believe in Part 11 still, but we believe in data integrity in everything, not just on on machines, but instruments, handwritten records, everything. So basically what they did is they took Part 11 and they said, we're broadening this out to more. My understanding is, and I could be wrong, but my understanding is that the whole Part 11 thing is focused more on data integrity and focused more on laboratory data. That the FDA has a very strong need to know that the laboratory results that are coming out of the labs for all these pharmaceutical companies or medical device companies, as it were, is accurate. They need to know that it's believable. Somebody didn't fudge the results because they didn't meet their passing targets or whatever it is. That they want to make sure it's true. And the only way you can know that it's true is through being sure that the records are verifiably correct. And so that's Part 11, but it's Part 11 on steroids is really what data integrity is.
All right, and it looks like we have one more question. It says, we know that there is more emphasis on test method validation these days. Just wanted to know if there's an increase in the trend on observation specific to test method validation. They're not sure if this is considered a subset of design validation. So wanting some clarification on that.
So test method validation and design validation, not necessarily the same thing, I wouldn't think. Test method validation, of course, is, a laboratory methods validation, verifying, usually using a USP, that your test has, specificity, sensitivity, linearity, et cetera, that measures the analyte that you're trying to measure in that test. Design validation is more about, does your medical device, and design validation is only a medical device standard, does your medical device operate in the hands of the users as intended, to support its intended use? So they're two different things. I can't answer the first question about test method validation because it didn't make it in the top 10. And I'm really right here, I'm only discussing the top 10. Design validation, though, is not a subset of the test method validation part. So it would be someplace, test method validation will be someplace further down into, not in the top 10. That doesn't mean that it's not important. It is. It's obviously a data integrity issue. The FDA is going to be looking to make sure, can you believe the test results that are coming out of this test method? Is your method accurate enough that it's actually finding defective product without throwing out product that is good? But they're not the same thing, and I don't have the data for the test method validation.
Okay, and we have one additional question, and that is, what about vendor qualification? Are there any new requirements?
New requirements to vendor qualification, no. But there is a guidance document out there about vendor qualification. One thing that's very important and is getting a lot of notice with the FDA nowadays is your supplier agreements. How strong are your supplier agreements? How well are you holding your suppliers to those supplier agreements? It's kind of an issue because frankly, especially if you're talking about a single sourced supplier where you can't find anybody else who will sell it, or you are looking to buy something in such minute quantities that a company is not willing to alter their entire quality management system for you, you have to find a way to manage around that and be able to have procedures that allow that flexibility to source the suppliers that you need to and still ensure adequate quality. There may be some other actions that you need to take that are creative solutions to make sure that you are meeting what your quality unit agrees is what it needs to have. And actually, supplier agreements are hard. They really are. So generally, it's important for you to understand the risk of each of your suppliers. Basically, what's the risk of the product versus what's the risk of the, product failing that you're getting, and how does it impact things, and work from there. And if you can tier your suppliers by risk, and then somehow work the supplier agreement problem so that it works better and that you have a good way of monitoring the performance of your suppliers, you'd be okay. But it hasn't changed. But there is a guidance document out there of what the FDA current thinking is. And of course, they say it's not enforceable, but it's their current thinking, and you want to consult that.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think that wraps up all of our questions for the session. Again, I think this was a great session today. Appreciate Regina taking time out to be here. Despite her getting over her cold and everything, we did not want to reschedule it in anyone. We knew everyone made time for this. So appreciate everyone showing up, these great questions. We really hope that this has been informational for you. We are here anytime for questions, so you can check us out at complianceteaminc.com. There's a contact us page, and anytime that you have a question, please shoot it on over. We never turn a question away. Hoping to have more of these sessions, and would love to see you guys at those. So check your email. And again, everyone will be receiving a copy of the recorded webinar as well as a PDF copy link. The PDF copy will be on our website within the next couple of days. So thanks again. We hope everyone has a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.